Have you ever watched an anime so bad that it made you question how it even got greenlit? In 2024, we saw some of the most disappointing series in recent years, and today we are counting down the top 10 worst anime of the year. From baffling writing choices to lackluster animation, these shows left fans frustrated and wanting their time back. Stick around until the end, because my number one pick isn't just bad, it's downright infamous. Let's go. Number 10. Quality Assurance in Another World. Let's kick things off with Quality Assurance in Another World. At first glance, this series seemed like a creative twist on the isekai genre. It follows Hozuki, a debugger, mysteriously transported into a malfunctioning fantasy game world. Partnering with an NPC, he takes on the role of fixing glitches and uncovering the secrets of this broken universe. On paper, the concept seemed brilliant. A meta-commentary on gaming wrapped in a fantasy adventure. However, that's where the excitement ends. By the first few episodes, teased a quirky, self-aware comedy, the show quickly descended into monotony. The pacing was erratic, with long stretches of uninteresting dialogue that did little to move the plot forward. Instead of exploring the fascinating world it introduced, the series wasted time on redundant conversations and overly simplistic problem solving. The animation didn't fare much better. While the character designs were passable, the overall art direction felt uninspired. The action sequences were stiff and lacked energy, often relying on poor executed CGI that only detracted from the experience. Fans described it as watching a PowerPoint presentation with voiceovers, and honestly, that's not far off. The humor, which should have been the show's saving grace, often felt forced. It leaned too heavily on overused gaming tropes, failing to add any new twists or creativity. Viewers hoped for sharp wit and clever commentary, but instead received a series of tired jokes and repetitive gags. By the halfway point, most viewers had dropped the series, citing its lack of progression and inability to deliver on its initial promise. Quality Assurance in Another World assured one thing: disappointment. Number 9. Hamidashi Creative. At number 9 we have Hamidashi Creative, an anime adaptation of a visual novel that unfortunately failed to capture the charm of its source material. The series centers around a high school student who becomes entangled with romantic escapades with several female classmates, each with distinct personalities and backgrounds. While the visual novel was praised for its engaging storytelling and character development, the anime adaptation fell short in several key areas. One of the most glaring issues was the series' pacing. Condensing a complex visual novel into a limited number of episodes led to rushed storylines and underdeveloped character arcs. Viewers found it challenging to connect with the characters, as the anime didn't provide sufficient time to explore their motivations and relationships deeply. The animation quality was another point of contention. Critics and fans noted inconsistent art styles, with certain episodes displaying noticeable drops in quality. This inconsistency detracted from the viewing experience, making it difficult for audiences to stay immersed in the story. Furthermore, the anime's reliance on common tropes without adding a unique twist made it feel generic. The lack of originality and innovation led to comparisons with other, more successful series in the same genre, highlighting Hamidashi Creative's shortcomings. Critics also pointed out that the anime failed to capture the emotional depth and nuance of the visual novel. Key scenes that were impactful in the game were either omitted or poorly executed in the adaptation, leaving fans disappointed. In summary, Hamidashi Creative serves as a cautionary tale about the challenges of adapting visual novels into anime. Its failure to effectively translate the source material's strength onto the screen resulted in a series that felt lackluster and uninspired, earning it a spot on our list of the worst anime of 2024. Number 8. Demon Lord Retry R. At number 8 we have Demon Lord Retry R, the sequel to the equally polarizing Demon Lord Retry. The original series received mixed reviews for its clunky animation and unoriginal premise, but some fans hoped that this sequel would be a chance for redemption. Unfortunately, it turned out to be another misstep. The story once again follows Akira Ono, a game developer transported into the body of a demon lord named Hakuto Kunai. While the first season introduced us to Hakuto's attempts to navigate this new world, the sequel failed to expand on the intriguing aspects of its premise. Instead, it doubled down on fanservice, unfunny comedy, and filler episodes. Hakuto's character development, or lack thereof, was one of the show's biggest problems. Despite being a central figure, he remained stagnant, showing little growth or evolution. His interactions with the supporting cast often felt forced, with dialogue that was awkward and unnatural. Speaking of the supporting cast, they were a mixed bag of underdeveloped archetypes. Many of the characters introduced in the sequel added nothing to the story, serving as little more than distractions from the main plot. Their over-the-top antics and lack of depth made it hard to care about their fates or relationships. The pacing was another glaring flaw. The series meandered through mundane subplots that contributed nothing to the overarching narrative. Instead of building tension or stakes, these episodes felt like time fillers, leaving viewers bored and disengaged. On the technical side, Demon Lord Retry R didn't improve much from its predecessor. The animation was still choppy, with stiff character movements and poorly executed action scenes. The art style, while colorful, lacked the polish and consistency needed to elevate the series. Fans and critics alike were quick to voice their disappointment, with many calling it a wasted opportunity to build on the first season's potential. In the end, Demon Lord Retry R was yet another sequel that no one really asked for, leaving viewers wishing the series had just stopped at one season. Number 7. A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero. At number 7, we have A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero. This fantasy anime introduced us to Renton, a self-proclaimed nobody who dreams of becoming a legendary exploration hero in a sprawling world of dungeons and treasures. It sounded like a promising underdog story, but sadly, this anime never made it out of mediocrity. One of the most glaring issues was the sheer lack of originality. The plot followed a painfully predictable formula, with Renton stumbling through one uninspired adventure after another. Instead of surprising audiences with creative twists, the story leaned on tired tropes and shallow conflicts that were resolved far too easily. Renton himself wasn't much of a hero. While underdog protagonists are meant to inspire through grit and determination, Renton came across as whiny and unmotivated. His growth throughout the series was minimal, making it hard for viewers to connect with or root for him. The supporting cast didn't fare much better. Most of them felt like placeholders rather than fully developed characters. Their relationships with Renton lacked depth, and their contributions to the story were forgettable at best. On the production side, the animation was mediocre. The action sequences, which should have been the highlight of the exploration-themed anime, were awkwardly choreographed and lacked impact. Backgrounds were dull, and the world building failed to capture the sense of wonder that the genre demands. Critics and fans alike were left unimpressed, with many labeling A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero as an uninspired and forgettable addition to the fantasy genre. Number 6. The Healer Who Was Banished from His Party. At number 6 is The Healer Who Was Banished from His Party, an anime that tried to combine drama, adventure, and revenge, but ended up being a mess of conflicting tones and poor execution. The story revolves around Lionel, a healer who is unjustly cast out of his party and sets out to prove his worth. While the premise had potential, the execution was riddled with problems. For starters, Lionel's character was wildly inconsistent. One moment he is a kind and noble healer, the next he is consumed by anger and making morally questionable decisions. Instead of coming across as complex, his personality felt disjointed and hard to follow. The pacing was another major issue. The story jumped between flashbacks, side quests, and the main plot without any sense of cohesion. Key moments that should have carried emotional weight were rushed, while unimportant scenes dragged on far too long. The supporting characters were equally problematic. Lionel's former party members, who should have been central to the story, were reduced to one-dimensional caricatures. Meanwhile, the new allies he gained lacked the chemistry and camaraderie needed to make relationships believable. The animation didn't do the series any favors. Fight scenes were poorly animated, with stiff movements and uninspired choreography. Even the magical healing effects, which should have been visually stunning, were bland and unimpressive. Fans of the fantasy genre were left disappointed, with many pointing out that the show failed to capitalize on its intriguing premise. Ultimately, the healer who was banished from his party felt like a shallow attempt to cash in on popular trends, leaving viewers underwhelmed. Number 5. Tasuketsu. Tasuketsu lands at number 5 as one of the most bafflingly executed anime of 2024. The premise: a group of people forced into a deadly game where they must vote on who lives and dies, had the potential to be a gripping psychological thriller. Unfortunately, the execution turned this into one of the most tedious shows of the year. The biggest issue was the lack of tension. For a series centered on life and death decisions, Tasuketsu somehow managed to make every vote feel inconsequential. The pacing was excruciatingly slow, with long, drawn-out conversations that added little to the plot or character development. The characters themselves were another weak point. While a strong ensemble cast is crucial for a series like this, Tasuketsu gave us a group of bland and unremarkable individuals. Their backstories were either non-existent or poorly developed, making it hard to care about their fates. The animation was equally uninspired. Despite the high-stakes premise, the visuals failed to convey any sense of urgency or danger. The character designs were generic and the settings were dull, lacking the atmospheric tension needed for a survival game anime. Fans of the psychological thriller genre were quick to voice their disappointment. Critics noted that Tasuketsu failed to capitalize on its premise, instead delivering a lifeless and unengaging experience. For a show about life and death choices, Tasuketsu ironically felt like it was sleepwalking through its own story. Before we move on, if you enjoy anime rankings and reviews, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means everything, and it helps me bring you more content on the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of anime. Number 4. Re Monster. Sliding into 4th place is Re Monster, an adaptation of a manga with a dedicated niche following. The story follows Tomoku Kanata, a human reincarnated as a goblin named Ro, in a world of survival and power struggles. As Ro consumes enemies to gain their abilities, he rises through the ranks to become a formidable force. While the premise promised a dark and gritty take on the reincarnation trope, the anime failed to deliver on nearly every front. One of the show's most glaring issues was its pacing. The narrative jumped from one event to the next without giving viewers time to absorb the stakes or connect with the characters. Major plot points were glossed over, leaving audiences confused and disengaged. The protagonist, Ro, was another weak point. While he is meant to be a cunning and resourceful anti-hero, the anime portrayed him as a little more than a power-hungry predator. His lack of emotional depth made it hard to sympathize with his journey, and his overpowered abilities removed any sense of tension from the story. The supporting characters fared no better. Most of them were little more than background noise, serving as plot devices rather than fully realized individuals. Their interactions with Ro felt hollow, making the group dynamics uninteresting. On the technical side, the animation was subpar. Action scenes, which should have been the highlight of the series, were riddled with choppy movements and poorly executed effects. The dark, gritty aesthetic of the source material was watered down, resulting in a visually bland adaptation. Fans of the manga were quick to voice their disappointment online, criticizing the anime for its lack of faithfulness to the source material. Critics also panned the series for its shallow storytelling and lack of originality, with many calling it a missed opportunity. In the end, Re Monster was yet another entry in the oversaturated reincarnation genre that failed to stand out. Instead of offering a fresh perspective, it became a forgettable slog that left viewers wondering what could have been. Number 3. Uzumaki. Coming in at number 3 is Uzumaki, the long-awaited adaptation of Junji Ito's iconic horror manga. Fans of the master of Japanese horror had been holding their breath for years, hoping for a faithful retelling of this twisted, spiral-filled nightmare. Sadly, when the adaptation finally arrived in 2024, it felt more like a bad dream than the terror-inducing masterpiece we were promised. The biggest issue? The animation. Uzumaki tried to replicate Junji Ito's signature art style, known for its intricate line work and haunting details, but the results were stiff and lifeless. The spirals, that are supposed to evoke dread and unease, came across as cartoonish and almost laughable in some scenes. Fans complained that the adaptation failed to capture the visceral horror of the manga, leaving much of its intended impact lost in translation. The pacing didn't help matters. Instead of taking its time to build suspense, the series rushed through key moments, stripping them of their tension. Scenes that should have left viewers squirming in discomfort instead came and went with little to no impact. The lack of atmosphere was a glaring flaw. Uzumaki is supposed to make you feel trapped and suffocated, yet the anime felt oddly hollow. The voice acting, while decent, couldn't save the series. Many of the characters lacked the emotional depth needed to sell the horror of their situations. This disconnect made it hard for viewers to empathize with their plight, further diminishing the overall experience. Perhaps the most damning criticism was how Uzumaki squandered its potential. With a wealth of horrifying material to draw from, it's baffling how the series managed to feel so bland. Fans who had waited years for this adaptation were left bitterly disappointed, wondering if they would ever see a proper anime adaptation of Junji Ito's work. In the end, Uzumaki is a cautionary tale about the dangers of failing to do justice to a beloved source material. If you're a fan of the manga, you're better off rereading it and skipping this lackluster adaptation entirely. Number 2. Failure Frame. At number 2 is Failure Frame. I became the strongest and annihilated everything with low-level spells. With a title like that, you would expect over-the-top action, dark twists, and a protagonist who defies the odds in spectacular fashion. Unfortunately, what we got was an edgelord fantasy that failed to deliver on any of its promises. The series follows Mimori Toka, a high school student summoned to another world only to be labeled as useless and cast into a deadly dungeon. Armed with low-level spells, he survives and grows stronger, vowing revenge on those who wronged him. On paper, it sounds like a standard revenge isekai, but Failure Frame lives up to its name in more ways than one. First, the protagonist. Mimori is meant to be a cunning, vengeful anti-hero, but instead he comes across as shallow and one-dimensional. His motivations are poorly explored, and his actions often feel more like a checklist of edgy tropes than genuine character development. Viewers found it hard to root for him, especially when his overpowered abilities removed any sense of tension or stakes. The supporting cast was equally underwhelming. The characters who accompany Mimori on his journey lack personality, serving more as plot devices than actual people. The villains are cartoonishly evil, making it impossible to take the story seriously. The story's pacing was another major issue. While the premise suggests a high-stakes survival tale, the series meandered with repetitive battles and uninspired dungeon-crawling sequences. Critics noted that the plot felt more like a string of disconnected events than a cohesive narrative. And let's talk about the animation, or lack thereof. Action scenes were riddled with awkward cuts and static frames, making what should have been epic battles feel lifeless. The art style itself was generic, with little to distinguish it from the countless other isekai flooding the market. Ultimately, Failure Frame failed to bring anything new to the table. Instead of being a gripping revenge tale, it became yet another forgettable entry in the oversaturated isekai genre. Number 1. The banished former hero lives as he pleases. Finally, we have reached the pinnacle of disappointment. The banished former hero lives as he pleases isn't just the worst anime of 2024. It's arguably one of the worst anime in recent memory. With its disjointed plot, cringe-worthy characters, and shockingly low production values, this series managed to alienate nearly everyone who gave it a chance. The story follows Alan, a former hero reincarnated into a peaceful life after being banished from his old party. Instead of an inspiring tale of redemption or self-discovery, the series bombards viewers with aimless episodes filled with shallow conflicts and over-the-top fanservice. Alan's supposed quest for peace quickly devolves into him collecting a harem and indulging in wish fulfillment fantasy. Alan himself is one of the most unlikable protagonists in recent anime history. Despite his supposed wisdom as a former hero, he spends most of the series acting like an immature teenager. His interactions with other characters are either painfully awkward or blatantly pandering, leaving viewers cringing at every turn. The supporting cast isn't much better. Each character is a walking stereotype, from the tsundere love interest to the ditzy sidekick. None of them have any real depth or development, making it impossible to care about their relationships or struggles. The plot, or lack thereof, is another major flaw. While the series teases larger conflicts and stakes, it never follows through. Instead, we are treated to episodic adventures that feel more like filler than actual story progression. By the end of the season, it's hard to tell what the point of the show even was. The animation deserves special mention for how bad it is. From inconsistent character designs to laughably bad action scenes, the production quality is shockingly low. Backgrounds are often flat and uninspired, and the use of CGI is so poorly integrated that it actively detracts from the viewing experience. Fans were quick to voice their frustration online, with many calling the series an insult to the isekai genre. Critics weren't any kinder, with some labeling it a train wreck that's somehow boring to watch. The banished former hero lives as he pleases is a masterclass in how not to make an anime. It takes everything wrong with modern isekai: lazy writing, pandering fanservice, and uninspired production, and amplifies it to new levels. If you are looking for the worst anime of 2024, look no further. And that's it. Did I miss any anime that deserved to be here? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me for this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more episodes. See you soon!